5 women ran from him. 5 brides who took one look at the scarred giant in the Montana mountains and chose the brutal stagecoach ride back over, staying another night. Elias Crow stopped counting rejections after the 3rd year. He stopped hoping after the 5th. Then a letter arrived from a woman who promised nothing. No beauty, no softness, no lies. Just survival. When Maylene Zhao stepped off that wagon in 1873, she didn't flinch. She didn't run. She walked straight into his cabin like she owned it. That single decision would change everything. If you want to see how 2 outcasts built something the world said was impossible, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The first time someone called Elias Crow a monster, he was 9 years old. It wasn't the word itself that stuck with him through the decades that followed. It was the casual way the shopkeeper's wife said it, like she was commenting on the weather or the price of flour. His mother had sent him into town for nails, and he'd stood there in his too small coat, coins clutched in his dirty hand, while the woman looked him up and down with the kind of expression you'd give a dog that had wandered in off the street. Poor thing, she'd said to her husband, not bothering to lower her voice. Already got his father's size. Going to be a monster of a man. Elias had walked out without the nails. His mother beat him for it, but he barely felt the switch. He was too busy understanding, for the first time, that something about him was wrong. Something people could see before he ever opened his mouth. By the time he was 15, he stood 6'4" and had shoulders like an ox yoke. By 20, he'd stopped trying to make himself smaller. By 30, he'd learned that people would always step back when he entered a room, would always find reasons to end conversations early, would always look at his hands, scarred from logging work, from fighting, from simple survival, and assume the worst. Now at 41, Elias Crow lived so far up in the Montana mountains that most people in the valley below had half forgotten he existed. That was exactly how he wanted it. The cabin sat at 8,000 feet, carved into the eastern face of a peak that didn't have a name on any map. 3 rooms, if you were generous with the definition. Logs he'd cut himself, chinked with mud and moss that he had to replace every few years. A stone fireplace that drew smoke poorly in high wind. 1 window, because glass was expensive and he didn't like the feeling of being watched. It wasn't much, but it was his. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles down a trail that was more of a suggestion than a road. The nearest town, Prospect Ridge, was a full day's ride even in good weather. In winter, Elias sometimes went 4 months without seeing another human face. He told himself he preferred it that way. The work kept him busy. Trap lines to check, game to hunt, firewood to split. In summer, he'd make the trip down to trade pelts for the things he couldn't make himself. Salt, gunpowder, coffee that tasted like burned dirt but was better than nothing. The merchants in Prospect Ridge never tried to cheat him. Fear had its advantages. But there were things money couldn't buy and solitude couldn't fix. Elias had learned that the hard way. The first bride arrived in the spring of 1869. Her name was Catherine something. He'd forgotten the last name within a week of her leaving. She'd been a widow from Pennsylvania, arranged through a letter service that matched Western men with Eastern women who'd run out of options. Elias had paid $12 for the advertisement and another $30 for her stagecoach fare. She'd lasted 4 days. He still remembered the look on her face when she first saw him. Not fear, exactly. Worse. Disappointment so profound it was almost pity. She'd been expecting rough, he supposed. Mountain men weren't known for their polish. But there was rough. And then there was Elias. The scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, courtesy of a grizzly bear he'd been stupid enough to surprise near a kill. The crooked nose, broken 3 times and never set right. The size of him, which made the cabin feel even smaller than it was. The silence, which he didn't know how to fill with the kind of pleasant conversation women seemed to expect. Catherine had tried. He'd give her that. She'd cooked meals and swept the floor and made small talk about the weather, about Pennsylvania, about nothing at all. But at night, when she'd blow out the lamp and they'd lie in the darkness on opposite sides of the bed, Elias could feel her fear like a third presence in the room. On the 4th morning, she'd asked him to take her back to town. "I'm sorry," she'd said, and maybe she even meant it. I can't. This place, it's all too much." Too much. He'd heard that before. The second bride, Mary, made it 11 days. That was almost impressive. She'd even seemed to warm to him a little, laughing at something he'd said about a fox getting into his chicken coop. But then a late snow had come in, trapping them in the cabin for 3 days straight, and by the time it cleared, Mary had packed her bag and was waiting by the door. "I thought I could do this," she'd told him. "I really did. But I can't breathe up here. It's like the mountain is pressing down on me. And you're kind enough, Elias, but you don't talk. You just exist, like a piece of the mountain yourself." He'd taken her to Prospect Ridge without argument. Number 3 was Ruth, 6 days. Number 4 was Adelaide. 2 days, a new record for brevity. Number 5, Constance, had actually made it 3 weeks, long enough that Elias had started to hope. She'd been older than the others, harder in the face, with hands that knew work. She'd organized his supplies, mended his shirts, even taught him a card game that involved more strategy than he'd expected. Then winter had set in properly, and Constance had watched the snow pile up against the cabin walls with increasing panic in her eyes. "How long?" she'd asked one morning in December. "Until the thaw? April, usually, sometimes May." She'd been on a horse heading down the mountain within the hour. Never mind the snow, never mind the danger. She'd rather risk freezing to death on the trail than spend another night in his cabin. After Constance, Elias stopped trying. That had been 2 years ago. 2 years of silence broken only by wind and wildlife. 2 years of cooking for one, sleeping alone, talking to no one but himself, and occasionally his mule, who was even less conversational than he was. He told himself it was fine. He'd survived worse than loneliness. But there were moments. Standing in front of the fireplace with snow howling outside, or waking in the darkest part of night with his heart racing for no reason he could name, when the silence felt less like peace and more like suffocation. Those were the moments when Elias understood what Mary had meant about not being able to breathe. The letter arrived in late March of 1873, when the snow was still thick on the ground, but the sun had started to hint at warmth. Elias made his monthly trip to Prospect Ridge for supplies, and the postmaster flagged him down before he could leave. "Got something for you," the man said, looking uncomfortable. He always looked uncomfortable around Elias. "From the bureau, the matrimonial bureau." Elias stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "I didn't request anything. They sometimes send follow-ups, women who saw the old listings." The postmaster pushed the letter across the counter and stepped back quickly, like he thought Elias might grab his hand by mistake. Elias took the letter, shoved it in his coat, and left without responding. He didn't open it until he was back at the cabin 2 days later, after the supplies were put away and the mule was settled. Part of him wanted to just throw it in the fire. What was the point? Another woman who'd take one look at him and realize her mistake. Another few days or weeks of awkward silence before she ran. But another part of him, the part that hated how quiet the cabin was, how empty the bed felt, how pointless it all seemed sometimes, made him break the seal. The handwriting was cramped and efficient, no wasted space. To Mr. Elias Crow, my name is Meilin Zhao. I am writing in response to your advertisement from 4 years ago. I understand you may have already found a wife, but if you have not, I wish to be considered. I will be direct because I do not believe in wasted words or false hopes. I am Chinese. I am 32 years old. I am not beautiful by any standard I know. I am strong, healthy, and capable of all work required for survival. I cook well, sew adequately, and fear very little. I left San Francisco because there is no future for me there. The men want submissive dolls who lower their eyes. The other women want nothing to do with someone who looks like me. I have been alone long enough to know it will not change. Your advertisement said you live far from people, that you want someone strong, not decorative. If this is true, I believe we may suit each other. If you have already married or changed your mind, I understand. If you have not, I will come if you send fare. I do not promise to love you. I promise to work. I promise not to run. The rest we will see. Respectfully, Meilin Zhao Elias read the letter 3 times. Then he sat in front of the fire for an hour, turning it over in his hands. Every instinct told him to burn it. He'd been rejected enough times. Did he really want to add a 6th? Did he really want to bring another woman up here just to watch her realize what a mistake she'd made? But something about the letter was different. The bluntness of it. The lack of any prettying up or empty promises. I do not promise to love you. I promise to work. I promise not to run. That last line stuck with him. The others had all run. Some faster than others, but they'd all run. This woman was promising not to. Elias didn't trust promises. He'd heard too many broken ones, but he trusted the coldness of her honesty. Anyone willing to write a letter that direct wasn't trying to sell him a fantasy. She was just stating terms. He could respect that. Against his better judgment, against every lesson he'd learned over the past 4 years, Elias got out paper and ink. Miss Zhao, I have not married. If you truly wish to come, I will send fare, but you should know what you are agreeing to. The cabin is small and rough. The winter is long and harsh. The nearest town is a day's ride. I am not an easy man. I do not speak much. I have been told I am frightening to look at. 5 women have already come and left. Most lasted less than a week. If you still wish to come knowing this, I will meet you in Prospect Ridge first week of May. If you take one look and change your mind, I will pay for your return fare. No questions asked. Elias Crow. He mailed it before he could talk himself out of it. 6 weeks later, on a bright May morning that felt more like March, Elias rode into Prospect Ridge and waited. The stagecoach was late, which wasn't unusual. The roads were mud from snowmelt, and drivers took their time. Elias waited outside the boarding house, standing because the bench was too small for someone his size, drawing stares from every person who passed. He'd worn his best shirt, which wasn't saying much. It was still rough homespun, patched at the elbows, but it was clean. He'd even trimmed his beard, though the mirror in his cabin was so old and warped he wasn't sure he'd done it evenly. When the stagecoach finally rattled into town, Elias felt his stomach clench. Here we go again. The driver jumped down and opened the door. A woman stepped out. She was small. That was Elias's first thought. Not delicate small like Adelaide had been, but compact, economical. She wore a dark blue dress that had been mended multiple times and carried a single worn travel bag. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, expressionless. She looked around the town with the same expression someone might use to assess a horse at auction. Then her eyes found Elias. He waited for it. The widening of the eyes, the step backward, the polite smile that didn't reach the eyes while she figured out how to get out of this. Maylene Zhao looked him up and down slowly. His size, his scars, his rough clothes, everything that had sent the others running. Her expression didn't change. She walked directly to him, stopped 3 feet away and said, "You are Elias Crow?" Her voice was flat, accentless, all business. "I am." "You look as described." That startled a short laugh out of him. "I describe myself?" "You said you are frightening to look at. This is accurate." She said it the way someone might note that the weather was cold. Simple fact, no judgment. Elias didn't know what to do with that. "Your letter said I could change my mind after seeing you," Maylene continued. "I have seen you. I have not changed my mind. Where is this cabin?" "A day's ride up the mountain. We can leave in the morning if—" "We can leave now. I have no reason to stay in this town. It'll be dark before we get there. The trail is rough." "Then we should not waste light standing here talking." She picked up her bag and looked at him expectantly. Elias had prepared himself for tears, for second thoughts, for the kind of feminine hesitation all the other brides had shown. He had not prepared himself for a woman who treated their meeting like a business transaction that was taking too long. "All right then," he said slowly. "My mule is at the stable. I'll rent a horse for you." "I can ride?" "Can you?" "Adequately." That turned out to be an understatement. When the stable hand brought out a gentle mare, the kind they usually gave to nervous women, Maylene looked at it with something close to scorn. "This animal is old and slow. I will not fall off something with more spirit." They gave her a younger horse, a gelding with some fire in him. Maylene swung into the saddle like she'd been born there, settled her bag, and looked at Elias again with that same flat expectation. "Lead the way." The ride-up was unlike anything Elias had experienced with the other brides. Catherine had cried quietly for the first hour. Mary had made constant nervous chatter. Ruth had looked like she was heading to her execution. Adelaide had required 3 stops to rest. Constance had asked endless questions about where they were going, how much farther, whether the trail was safe. Maylene Zhao rode in complete silence. Not uncomfortable silence, not sullen silence, just silence. She looked at the landscape with the same assessing expression she'd used on the town, occasionally shifting her weight when the trail got steep, but never complaining, never slowing. Elias kept waiting for her to say something, to ask something, to show some kind of reaction to the fact that she was riding into the mountains with a stranger who looked like he could snap her in half. Nothing. Finally, when they stopped to water the horses at a creek, Elias couldn't stand it anymore. "You're not afraid." Maylene looked at him. "Of what?" "Me. This. Any of it." She considered that while the horses drank. "I was afraid when I left China. I was 12. The ship was crowded and smelled like death. People died. I was afraid then." She paused. "I was afraid in San Francisco for different reasons, but I learned that being afraid does not change anything. It only makes you tired." "So you're not afraid because it's pointless?" "I am not afraid because I see no reason to be. You have not hurt me. The mountain is only a mountain. The cabin will be what it is. Fear does not make any of it different." Elias stared at her. Every other woman had projected their fear onto him, had seen his size and scars and filled in the gaps with their worst imaginings. This woman looked at the same things and just saw facts. "The others were afraid," he said. "The others were fools." Maylene stated it without heat. "They came expecting something that does not exist. A gentle mountain man, a comfortable wilderness. They wanted wilderness to be safe. That is like wanting fire to be cold, pointless." She remounted her horse without waiting for help. "We should continue. You said it will be dark soon." They reached the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the snow on the peaks orange and pink. Elias had always thought his cabin looked better from a distance. Up close, you could see how rough it was, how isolated, how much it looked like exactly what it was, a place someone came to hide. He waited for Maylene's reaction. She dismounted, handed him the reins, and walked a slow circle around the entire structure. She checked the roofline, tested the doorframe with her hand, peered through the window. Then she walked another 20 paces out and looked at the surroundings, the cleared area where he kept the chickens, the lean-to for the mule, the creek that ran 50 yards down the slope. "Water source is close." "Good. Drainage is poor here by the door. You will have mud problems." She pointed to the east side. "That corner sags. Foundation log is rotting." Elias felt something strange in his chest. The other women had looked at the cabin with disappointment or horror. This woman was evaluating it like a piece of property she was considering purchasing. "It needs work," he admitted. "Everything needs work. That is not a problem." She picked up her bag. Inside, the cabin was exactly as he'd left it. Sparse. Clean enough by his standards, though he suspected not by anyone else's. A table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, the fireplace, shelves for supplies. The second room was barely more than a closet where he kept tools and preserved food. The third room didn't exist. That had been an optimistic description in his original advertisement. Maylene set her bag down and conducted the same thorough examination she'd done outside. She ran her hand along the log walls, checking the chinking. She opened every shelf, cataloging contents. She tested the table's stability, examined the fireplace, even lifted the lid on the water barrel by the door. Then she turned to Elias, who'd been standing near the door feeling increasingly awkward in his own home. "You live like a man who has given up," she said. That stung more than it should have. "I live simply." "You live barely." She gestured around. "This is not a home. This is a place where someone survives until they die. No wonder the others ran. They looked at this and saw their future. Nothing. Just waiting." Elias felt anger spark in his chest. "If you don't like it, I did not say I do not like it." Maylene cut him off without raising her voice. "I said you have given up. That can change. Will you let me change it?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "I am here now. You want a wife, yes? Someone to stay. But this place is not a place anyone stays. It is a place people leave, so we will change it. Will you let me?" Every other bride had asked for changes in the tone of a request, soft and uncertain. Maylene wasn't asking. She was stating a fact and wanting to know if he'd fight her on it. Elias looked around his cabin, trying to see it through her eyes. How long had it been since he'd noticed how empty it was? How lifeless. "What would you change?" "Everything." She said it matter-of-factly. "But we start with food. You will show me your supplies." Over the next hour, Maylene took inventory of everything he had with the precision of a quartermaster. She didn't comment on the monotony of his stores, dried meat, beans, flour, salt, coffee, not much else, just made mental notes. Then she unpacked her own bag. It wasn't much. 2 extra dresses, both as worn as the one she wore. Some undergarments, a sewing kit, but at the bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, were packages of things Elias didn't recognize. Spices, Maylene said, seeing his look. Dried vegetables. Things I knew I could not find here. She unwrapped one package to show him dried mushrooms, another with small wrinkled things that might have been dried peppers. I told you I cook well, but I cannot cook well with only salt and hope. That night, Maylene made dinner. Elias had been cooking for himself for so long that he'd forgotten food could be more than fuel. He'd been eating to survive, nothing more. Boiled beans, fried meat, bread when he had the energy to make it. What Maylene did with his meager supplies shouldn't have been possible. She rehydrated some of the dried vegetables, combined them with some of his stored potatoes and a piece of venison, added spices he couldn't name, and created something that filled the cabin with a smell so good it made his eyes water. They ate in silence. Elias because he didn't know what to say. Maylene because she seemed to have no need to fill silence with meaningless words. The food was the best thing he'd tasted in years, maybe ever. When they finished, Maylene cleaned the dishes with the same efficiency she did everything else, then turned to face him. We should discuss the arrangement. Here it comes, Elias thought, the list of problems, the realization that she'd made a mistake, the request to leave. All right. I will sleep in the bed. You may build another or sleep by the fire. When I decide you are trustworthy, that may change, but not yet. Elias blinked. Of all the things he'd expected, it wasn't that. That's fine. I will cook. I will clean. I will maintain the home and help with work as needed. I am strong. I do not break easily. You will teach me what I do not know about living here. All right? In return, you will not hurt me. You will not force me. You will not lie to me. If you wish to end this arrangement, you will tell me directly so I have time to plan. If I wish to end it, I will do the same. That's fair. And you will talk to me. That one caught him. What? You sit in silence like a stone. The others may have wanted you to perform conversation like a trained dog, but I do not. I only want honesty. When you are angry, say it. When you are troubled, say it. When you want something, say it. I cannot know you if you give me nothing. No one had ever asked that of him before. They'd wanted him quieter, less present, less everything. Maylene wanted more. I'm not good with words, he said carefully. Neither am I. We will be bad at it together. She said it without a trace of humor, but something in her eyes suggested she understood the absurdity. Do you agree to these terms? Elias realized he was agreeing to more than housing arrangements. He was agreeing to try, to let someone see him, to stop hiding behind silence. It terrified him. I agree. Maylene nodded once, sharp and final. Good. Now I will sleep. Tomorrow we begin fixing this place. She took the bed without ceremony, didn't even close the curtain he'd hung for privacy. Just lay down in her dress, pulled the blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. Elias stood there for a moment, feeling like a stranger in his own cabin. Then he grabbed his bedroll and made a rough bed by the fireplace. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept worse places. As he lay there in the darkness, listening to the fire pop and the wind outside, he heard Maylene's breathing slow and deepen into sleep. She hadn't run. He didn't trust it yet, couldn't let himself hope. But as he drifted off, Elias couldn't help but notice that the cabin felt different, less empty, less like a tomb he was waiting to die in. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't wake up in the dark part of night with his heart racing and no reason why. He slept straight through until dawn. Maylene woke him before dawn by banging a pot against the side of the stove. Elias jerked upright, reaching for the rifle he kept beside his bedroll, heart hammering. For a confused second, he'd forgotten where he was, forgotten she was there. Maylene stood by the fireplace, already dressed, hair pulled back, looking at him with that same flat expression. You sleep like the dead. This is dangerous in the wilderness. Elias lowered the rifle, feeling foolish. What are you doing? Making breakfast. But first we will discuss the day's work. She didn't wait for him to respond. The drainage problem by the door, how do you fix this? He rubbed his face, trying to wake up properly. Outside, the sky was barely gray. There's a trench that needs clearing. Debris builds up. Water doesn't flow right. Show me after we eat. Also, the chicken coop smells like death. When did you last clean it? I don't know, month ago? We will clean it today. And that corner with the rotting log. You have replacement wood? Down at the tree line. I'd need to haul it up, strip it, cure it. How long to cure? Couple months, if I do it right. Maylene nodded, filing that away. We start today then. Summer is short here, yes? 4 months, maybe. Then we do not waste time. She ladled something into 2 bowls. It looked like the leftover stew from last night, reheated with some of her dried grain mixed in. Eat, then work. Elias ate. The food was somehow even better the second day, the flavors having settled overnight. He watched Maylene over the rim of his bowl. She ate with the same efficiency she did everything else. No wasted motion, eyes already calculating the next task. The other brides had treated their first morning like a trial period, waiting to see what he expected of them, moving carefully through the space like guests who might leave at any moment. Maylene had walked in and claimed ownership of everything she touched. You are staring, she said without looking up. You're different. Then what? Than what I expected. Now she did look at him. You expected someone soft, someone who would cry and need comfort, someone who would make you feel like a protector. It wasn't a question, but Elias nodded anyway. I do not need protection. I need partnership. That is what I offered in my letter. She set down her empty bowl. If you wanted something else, you should have said so before I came all this way. I don't want something else. The words came out rougher than he intended. I'm not used to this. Neither am I, so we will learn together. She stood, already moving toward the door. Show me this drainage problem. The next 3 hours were unlike any Elias had spent in years. Maylene didn't just watch him work. She worked beside him. When he showed her the clogged trench, she grabbed the second shovel without being asked and started clearing debris from the other end. She didn't do it well at first. Her technique was wrong, but when he corrected her, she adjusted immediately and kept going. In San Francisco, I worked in a laundry, she said as they dug. 14 hours a day. Heat like hell. Water that burned your hands. The owner was a white man who thought Chinese women were decorations who could wash clothes. He learned differently. What happened? I organized the other workers. We demanded better pay. He refused. We stopped working. She hauled out a chunk of rotted wood, examined it, tossed it aside. He hired new girls. We taught them to strike too. Eventually he paid. Not much more, but more. Elias stopped digging. You organized a strike? Is that surprising? Most women don't. Most women are told they cannot. That is different than actually cannot. She kept working, not looking at him. I learned this early. What people say you are and what you actually are do not have to match. People said I should be grateful for any work, grateful for any man who would take me, grateful to be alive. I decided I would rather be useful than grateful. Something about the way she said it made Elias's chest feel tight. How many times had he been told to be grateful? Grateful people let him buy supplies instead of running him out of town. Grateful anyone would speak to him at all. Grateful for whatever scraps of human contact came his way. I understand that, he said quietly. Maylene glanced at him, and for the first time her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something less flat. A crack in the wall. I thought you might. That is why I came. They finished the trench in silence, but it felt different than the silence of the day before. Less like two strangers and more like two people working toward the same goal. By midday, they'd moved on to the chicken coop. Maylene had been right. It was disgusting. Elias had let it go too long, and the smell alone was enough to knock a person back. But Maylene waded in without hesitation, mucking out the old straw and waste while he hauled it to the compost pile. You have 8 chickens, but only 3 are laying, she observed. The others are too old or sick. I know. Why keep them? Elias didn't have a good answer. Seemed wrong to kill them just for not producing. That is sentiment. Sentiment is expensive here. But she said it without judgment, just stating a fact. We will keep them through summer. If they do not improve, we butcher them before winter. Agreed? Agreed. Good. Now we need more chickens. Young ones. Where do you buy them? Prospect Ridge sometimes. Or I can try to hatch eggs if one of the hens goes broody. Maylene made a dismissive sound. Waiting for a hen to decide to sit is foolish. We will buy chicks on your next trip to town. 6 at least. That's expensive. Not as expensive as having no eggs all winter. She gave him a look that suggested she thought he was being deliberately dense. You live like a poor man, but you have money, yes? I saw the cash under your floorboard. Elias stiffened. You went through my things? I inventoried the cabin. That includes knowing what resources we have. She didn't sound defensive, just practical. I did not take anything. I only need to know what we can afford to buy and what we must do without. Unless you prefer I remain ignorant? He wanted to be angry about the invasion of privacy, but she had a point. If they were going to survive up here together, they both needed to know what they were working with. No, he said finally. You're right. No one's ever just looked before. The others tiptoed around you like you were a wild animal. I do not have time for that. She went back to raking out soiled straw. Besides, you are not wild. You are just unused to being seen clearly. That will change. The certainty in her voice should have been arrogant, but it wasn't. She stated it the same way she'd state that winter was cold or water was wet. Simple fact. They worked through the afternoon. Maylene's stamina surprised him. She was small, but she didn't tire easily, and she never complained. When her hands started to blister from the unfamiliar work with the shovel, she wrapped them with strips of cloth from her bag and kept going. You should rest, Elias said when he noticed. Why? Your hands will toughen. That is how hands work. She didn't even slow down. In the laundry, my hands bled for the first month. Then they stopped. These blisters are nothing. As the sun started to sink, Elias called a halt. We should stop. You've done enough for one day. There is still light. Barely, and you're limping. I am not. She stopped, seemed to register the ache in her leg for the first time, and frowned. That is annoying. What happened? Nothing. Old injury. Sometimes it bothers me. She said it dismissively, but Elias saw the way she shifted her weight off that leg. What kind of injury? For the first time, Maylene hesitated. A man in San Francisco decided that because I would not smile at him, I needed to be taught respect. He used a cane. My leg broke badly. It healed wrong. The casual way she said it made Elias's hands curl into fists. What happened to him? His cane ended up in a place canes should not go. Now she did smile, sharp and mean. He did not bother me again. Elias found himself smiling back. Good. That evening, Maylene cooked again, this time using some of the eggs from the hens and the last of his stored onions. She moved around the cabin like she'd been there for years, not 2 days, rearranging his supplies in ways that actually made sense. Your preservation method is wrong, she said, inspecting his stores of dried meat. You are losing too much to mold. I do the best I can. Your best is inadequate. I will show you the correct way. She pulled down a strip of venison, examined it critically, then set it aside. This is still good. This we will use tonight. The rest we may need to discard. That's half my winter meat. Then we will hunt more, or we will dry it correctly so it lasts. She looked at him. You cannot keep doing things the wrong way just because it is the way you have always done them. That is how people die in places like this. She was right, and Elias knew it. He'd been surviving, but barely. Making do with methods that sort of worked, never quite improving, never quite failing completely, just existing. Fine, he said, show me. Over dinner, the eggs were incredible, somehow fluffy and rich despite the battered pan and the uncertain heat of the fireplace. Maylene laid out her plans for the cabin. The roof needs rethatching on the north side. I saw light coming through in 3 places. When it rains, you will have leaks. I know. I've been meaning to fix it. For how long? Elias thought about it. 2 years, maybe? That is not meaning to fix. That is accepting decay. She pointed at him with her fork. We will fix it next week. Also, you need better storage for root vegetables. The corner where you keep them is too warm. They will spoil before winter. Where should I keep them? We will dig a proper root cellar, not large, just enough for winter stores. That's days of work. Yes. So we start soon. She took another bite, chewed thoughtfully. Also, your bed is terrible. The frame is weak and the mattress is nearly flat. How do you sleep? Poorly. We will fix this too. You have extra straw from cleaning the chicken coop. We can restuff the mattress. The frame will take more work. Elias listened to her list off improvements with a mixture of exhaustion and something else, something he couldn't quite name. The cabin had been his fortress of solitude for so long, and here was this small, fierce woman planning to tear it apart and rebuild it. Why do you care? He asked finally. You could just live here. Use what's already here. Why put in all this work? Maylene set down her fork and looked at him directly. Because I am not here to simply exist. I am here to build a life. That requires work. She paused. Also, I told you, this place looks like somewhere people wait to die. I have no intention of dying here, so we will make it somewhere people can actually live. I've been living here for 15 years. No, you have been surviving here. That is different. She stood and started clearing the dishes. Surviving is what you do when you have no choice. Living is what you do when you decide to try. The words hit harder than they should have. Elias sat there, watching her wash the dishes in the basin, and tried to remember the last time he'd done anything other than survive. When had he stopped trying? After Constance left? Before that? Maybe after the third bride. Maybe after he'd realized that no matter what he did, people would always see the monster before they saw the man. What if I don't know how anymore? He said quietly. Maylene glanced back at him. Then I will teach you, just as you will teach me how to survive winter here. She dried her hands on a cloth. That is the arrangement, yes? We teach each other. That night, as Elias lay by the fireplace, he listened to Maylene's breathing slow into sleep and thought about the day. His body ached from the work. They'd done more in one day than he usually did in 3. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from building something instead of just maintaining it. He thought about her words, about the difference between surviving and living, about how she'd walked into his life and immediately started dismantling his careful isolation. It should have terrified him, should have made him want to put those walls back up, to protect himself before she inevitably left like all the others. But as he drifted towards sleep, listening to the fire crack and the wind outside and the sound of another person breathing in his cabin, Elias realized he didn't want to put the walls back up. He wanted to see what she would build instead. The next morning, Maylene woke him the same way, banging the pot, and they fell into a rhythm. Days started before dawn. Breakfast, then work. Maylene attacked every project with the same relentless efficiency. They fixed the roof, which took 3 days and resulted in both of them sunburned and sore. They started digging the root cellar, which was brutal work in the rocky soil. They hauled logs from the tree line for the foundation repair, and Maylene learned to strip bark with the same fierce concentration she brought to everything else. She wasn't naturally good at physical labor. Her body wasn't built for it, but she made up for it with pure stubbornness. When Elias tried to take an axe from her because the blisters on her hands had opened again, she'd given him a look that could freeze water. I am not fragile. Stop treating me like I am. You're hurt. I am healing. That is different. She'd gone back to chopping, her strokes getting more controlled with each swing. Pain is temporary. Weakness is a choice. Elias had watched her work, this small woman who'd decided that sheer will could overcome any limitation, and felt something shift in his chest. Admiration, maybe, or recognition. He knew what it was like to refuse to break. But it wasn't all work. In the evenings, after dinner, they'd sit by the fire and Maylene would ask him questions. How did you end up here? Elias had stared into the flames, trying to figure out how to explain. My father was a trapper, moved around a lot, never stayed anywhere long enough for people to get too familiar. I learned early that being big was a problem. People assumed things. What things? That I was stupid, violent, dangerous. He'd flexed his scarred hands. My father died when I was 17. I tried to settle in a town down in Wyoming, got work at a mill, but the foreman's daughter said that I'd done something I hadn't. Didn't matter what the truth was. I left before they could hang me. Maylene had nodded slowly. People see what they expect to see, especially when they are afraid. Yeah. So you came here to hide. It wasn't a question, but Elias answered anyway. I came here because it was the only place that would have me. And now? Now I don't know. He'd looked at her then. You're changing things. Is that bad? I don't know yet. She'd smiled at that, small and knowing. Honest, good. Another evening she'd asked about the scars. Elias had been peeling potatoes. Maylene had taught him a faster way to do it, and her eyes had settled on the ragged line that ran down his face. The bear that did this. You killed it? Yeah. How? Knife. It was stupid. I should have backed away, but I was young and angry and tired of running from things. He touched the scar unconsciously. Got lucky. If it had hit an inch to the left, would have taken my eye. But it didn't. No. Do you regret fighting it? Elias thought about that. Sometimes, this scar is the first thing people see. It tells them I'm dangerous before I even speak. It tells them you survived something that should have killed you. That is different than dangerous. Maylene had gone back to sewing. She was mending one of his shirts, making small, precise stitches. People will always find a reason to fear what they do not understand. The scar is just convenient. If you did not have it, they would find something else. You sound certain. I am. I have been foreign everywhere I have ever lived. In China, I was too bold. In San Francisco, I was too Chinese. Here, I am too much of both. She bit off the thread, examined her work. You cannot win a game where the rules are designed for you to lose. So you stop playing their game and make your own. Is that what this is? Your own game. This is me choosing what I will accept and what I will not. I will not accept being treated as less. I will not accept hiding who I am. And I will not accept a man who is too afraid to see me clearly. She'd looked up at him then, direct and unflinching. You see me? Yes? Elias had nodded, throat tight. Yeah, I see you. Good. Then we will do well. 2 weeks after Maylene arrived, Elias made his monthly trip to Prospect Ridge. This time Maylene came with him. She sat astride the gelding like she'd been born in a saddle, surveying the town with the same assessing look she'd given everything else. When they reached the general store, she dismounted and straightened her dress. You will buy the chickens. I will buy fabric and thread. We will meet back here. You don't want me to come with you? Why would I? I am buying cloth, not facing wolves. She'd already started walking toward the dry goods store. Elias watched her go, aware that half the town was watching too. A Chinese woman in Prospect Ridge was unusual enough. A Chinese woman walking alone with her head up and no apology in her posture was practically revolutionary. He bought the chickens, 6 pullets, young enough to start laying by fall, and some feed. When he came out, he saw Maylene talking to Mrs. Henderson, who ran the dry goods store. Or rather, Mrs. Henderson was talking at Maylene, who was nodding politely while clearly not listening to a word. Simply can't imagine what would bring a woman like you all the way out here, Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice carrying across the street. Surely there are more suitable situations in the cities. There are not, Maylene cut in. That is why I am here. But living so far from civilization, with a man like Mr. Crow, she lowered her voice, but not enough. Dear, I don't think you understand what you've gotten yourself into. I understand perfectly. Maylene's voice had gone flat and cold. I understand that Mr. Crow is honest, hardworking, and does not insult me by assuming I am incapable of making my own decisions. If that is what you call unsuitable, then I am happy with my choice. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone red. Well, I never... Perhaps you should. Maylene picked up her package and walked away, heading straight for Elias without a backward glance. When she reached him, her expression was murderous. That woman is a fool. Mrs. Henderson? Yeah, she is. She thinks I do not know what I am doing, that I need her guidance. Maylene mounted her horse with jerky, angry movements. As if she knows anything about what I need. Elias felt a smile tugging at his mouth. You told her off pretty well. I should have told her more, but some of the tension left her shoulders. These people, they think being first makes them wise. It only makes them stubborn. On the ride back, Mei Lin was quieter than usual. Finally, as they reached the steeper part of the trail, she spoke. They will talk about us. They already do. It will get worse. Chinese woman, white man, living alone on a mountain. She glanced at him. Does this bother you? Elias thought about it. People have been talking about me my whole life. At least now they have a reason that's true. What do you mean? They always assumed I was dangerous, violent. Now they can talk about how I've got some foreign woman up there, probably keeping her prisoner, or worse. At least that's more interesting than just being the scary hermit. Mei Lin was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. Actually laughed, sharp and surprised. You're darker than you appear. I'm realistic. That is what all dark people say. But she was smiling now, that rare crack in her armor. Fine, let them talk. We have better things to do than care about the opinions of fools. That night, they restuffed the mattress with fresh straw and herbs that Mei Lin had found growing near the creek. The whole cabin smelled like sage and pine. They'd also started building a second bed frame, but it was slow work, and Mei Lin had declared the current one acceptable for now. We will share, she'd said, in that same matter-of-fact tone she used for everything. There is no point in both of us being uncomfortable, but you will stay on your side. I will. And if you snore, I will smother you with a pillow. I don't snore. We will see. That night was the first time they'd shared the bed. Elias lay on his back, rigid, acutely aware of the small, warm presence a foot away from him. Mei Lin seemed completely unbothered, falling asleep almost immediately. It took Elias hours to relax. Not because he wanted anything from her, though he'd be lying if he said he wasn't aware of her as a woman, but because it had been so long since anyone had trusted him enough to be vulnerable near him. Catherine had slept with her back to the wall, like she expected him to attack any moment. Mary had asked for a lock on the bedroom door. The others had found various ways to create distance. Mei Lin just slept, like she had no doubt that he'd keep his word. Sometime in the night, Elias woke to find her turned toward him, one hand curled near her face, completely relaxed. In sleep, the hardness in her expression softened. She looked younger, less like a woman who'd survived hell and more like someone who deserved peace. Elias made himself a silent promise. Whatever else happened, he would make sure she had that peace, even if it was the only thing he ever gave her. The days blurred into weeks. May became June, and the mountain bloomed into brief, fierce life. Mei Lin spent hours learning the landscape, finding wild herbs and edible plants that Elias had never bothered to notice. She started a small garden near the cabin, planting seeds she'd brought from San Francisco, Chinese vegetables with names Elias couldn't pronounce. This is bok choy, this is gailan. We will see if they survive here, she'd said, patting dirt around the seedlings with careful hands. The altitude may kill them, but we try anyway. She also started changing the cabin in small ways. A curtain across the corner where they kept supplies, made from fabric she'd bought in town. Herbs hanging from the rafters to dry. The dishes arranged in a way that actually made sense instead of just shoved on a shelf. Elias watched his fortress of solitude transform into something that almost looked like a home and couldn't bring himself to mind. One evening in late June, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the peaks pink and gold, Mei Lin spoke without looking at him. I have been here 6 weeks. I know. That is longer than any of the others. Yeah? Do you know why I've stayed? Elias had thought about it, but he wanted to hear her answer. Why? Because you do not try to make me smaller. She turned to look at him then, her eyes serious. Every man I have known wanted me to be less. Less opinionated, less strong, less visible. You let me be more. That is rare. You make me want to be more too, Elias said quietly. I'd forgotten that was possible. Mei Lin smiled, small and real. Then we are both learning. That is good. She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated touch. Her hand was small and rough, calloused from weeks of hard work. Elias closed his fingers gently around hers and felt something in his chest unlock. For the first time in his life, he let himself hope that this might actually last. The moment didn't last. 3 days after Mei Lin first took his hand, a late summer storm rolled in from the north with the kind of violence that reminded Elias why most people didn't live this high up. The sky turned black at noon, and the wind hit the cabin like something alive and angry. Maylene stood at the window, watching the trees bend nearly horizontal, her expression unreadable. "This is normal?" she asked. "Normal enough. We're exposed up here, nothing to break the wind." Elias was checking the shutters, making sure they were latched properly. "It'll blow over by tomorrow." "And if it doesn't? Then we wait it out. We've got supplies." But even as he said it, Elias felt the old familiar tension in his shoulders. The cabin had weathered worse storms, but that didn't mean it would weather this one. The roof they'd patched was new work, untested. The foundation log they'd replaced was still settling, and the wind was coming from a direction that hit their weakest wall. By nightfall, the storm had gotten worse instead of better. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and somewhere above them, something was banging loose. Elias climbed up to check and found one of their new roof patches lifting, the leather ties they'd used starting to tear. "I need to secure it," he shouted down to Maylene over the wind. "In this?" She'd followed him outside despite the rain. Her hair was plastered to her head, her dress already soaked through. "You will fall and break your neck. If I don't fix it, we'll have water pouring in by morning. The whole patch could tear off. Then I will hold the ladder." "Maylene, do not argue with me. We are wasting time." She was already positioning herself at the base of the ladder, gripping it with both hands despite the wind trying to tear it away. Elias climbed. The rain made everything slick, and the wind kept trying to shove him sideways off the rungs. When he reached the roof, he had to flatten himself against it just to keep from being blown off. The patch was worse than he'd thought. 2 of the ties had already ripped free, and the leather was lifting like a sail. He pulled out the spare ties he'd brought and started working, fingers numb from cold, squinting against rain that felt like needles. Below him, he could hear Maylene shouting something, but the wind tore the words away. It took 15 minutes that felt like hours. When he finally climbed back down, his hands were bleeding from the rough roof work, and he was shaking from cold and adrenaline. Maylene took one look at him and dragged him inside. "Stupid," she said, stripping off his soaked shirt without ceremony. "You could have died. The roof is not worth your life." She shoved a blanket at him, then went to stoke the fire. "We could have waited until morning, done it in daylight." By morning, the whole section would have been gone. "So? We would fix it later." She turned to glare at him, and Elias realized she was shaking too, not from cold, from fear. "Do you think I came all this way to watch you fall off a roof in a storm?" The rawness in her voice caught him off guard. Maylene didn't do vulnerable. She did practical, efficient, controlled. But right now, standing there soaked and shaking, she looked terrified. "I'm sorry," Elias said quietly. "I didn't think—" "No. You did not think. You saw a problem and charged at it like a bull. That is how men die." She wrapped her arms around herself. "My father did the same thing. Saw a wagon losing its wheel, ran to help. The wheel crushed his chest. He died doing something brave and stupid and unnecessary." Elias hadn't known that. Maylene never talked about her family. "How old were you?" 10. She said it flatly, pushing the emotion back down. "Old enough to understand that bravery and stupidity often look the same." "I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just fixing a problem." "That is the same thing." She turned away, grabbed a dry cloth, and started drying her own hair with jerky, angry movements. "You think because you are big and strong, nothing can hurt you. But everyone can be hurt, even you." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the silence between them felt heavier than the wind. Elias thought about all the times he'd taken stupid risks because he didn't think his life was worth much anyway. Running from the bear instead of waiting it out. Fighting men twice his size because he was tired of being pushed around. Living up here alone because if something killed him, at least he'd die on his own terms. It had been easier when no one cared whether he lived or died. When the only person who'd suffer from his bad decisions was him. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have waited. I'm not used to someone caring if I make it through the night." Maylene stopped drying her hair, looked at him for a long moment. "Get used to it," she said quietly. "Because I am here now, and I do not invest my time in things I expect to lose." That night, the storm shook the cabin so hard that dishes rattled in their shelf. They lay in bed listening to the wind scream and the rain hammer, and somewhere far off, a tree crack and fall with a sound like thunder. Maylene moved closer to him in the darkness, not quite touching, but close enough that Elias could feel her warmth. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of the storm?" "No." "Of me?" That made him turn his head to look at her, though he could barely make out her shape in the darkness. "Why would I be afraid of you?" "Because I am changing things. Because you built this life to be alone, and I am making it so you cannot be alone anymore." Her voice was soft but steady. "That is frightening for some people." Elias thought about it. Was he afraid? Maybe. But not in the way she meant. "I'm afraid of what happens if you leave," he admitted. "The cabin was just a place before. Now it's starting to feel like a home. If you go, I don't think I can go back to how it was." "Then I will not go." "You don't know that. Something might happen. You might change your mind." "Elias," she said his name firmly, cutting through his spiral. "I do not say things I do not mean. When I say I will not go, I mean I have decided to stay. Not for today. Not for this month. I mean, I have chosen this. Chosen you." She paused. "Unless you want me to go?" "No." The word came out too fast, too desperate. "No, I want you to stay." "Then stop waiting for me to leave. It is exhausting." But there was something almost gentle in her voice. "I understand you have been hurt, that people have left you, but I am not them. I am me, and I am still here." She reached out in the darkness and found his hand, squeezed it once, hard. Elias squeezed back and tried to believe her. The storm blew itself out by dawn, leaving the world washed clean and exhausted. They spent the day checking for damage, clearing fallen branches, making sure the animals had weathered it. One of the new chickens had died, which made Maylene furious. "Stupid bird, I told you we needed better shelter for them. We'll build a better coop. We will build it this week, before the next storm." She was already sketching plans in the dirt with a stick. "Stronger walls, better drainage, and we raise it off the ground so predators cannot dig under." Elias watched her plan and calculate, already 3 steps ahead, and felt something warm settle in his chest. This was who she was. Point her at a problem, and she'd solve it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. The new coop took 4 days to build. Maylene had opinions about every aspect of it, and they argued more during those 4 days than they had in the previous 2 months combined. "The door needs to face east," Maylene insisted. "That'll put it right in the wind. The morning sun is more important. The chickens need light to lay properly. They need to not freeze to death in winter. Then we will add a windbreak, but the door faces east." Elias had learned by now that when Maylene used that particular tone, she'd already made up her mind. The door faced east. He built the windbreak. When they were done, though, even Elias had to admit it was a better structure than the old coop had been. Sturdier, more weatherproof, actually designed instead of just thrown together. "See?" Maylene said, hands on her hips, surveying their work. "This is what happens when you plan properly. You're insufferable when you're right." "Then I am insufferable often. You will adjust." But she was smiling, that small, private smile that meant she was pleased. That night, as they sat outside in the cooling air, Maylene brought up something she'd been circling around for days. "Winter will be hard here." "Yeah." "Harder than you have told me." Elias didn't bother lying. "Yeah, probably. Tell me the truth, all of it. I need to know what to prepare for." So Elias told her. About storms that lasted days, where you couldn't see 3 feet in front of your face. About cold that made the cabin walls frost on the inside despite the fire. About weeks where leaving the cabin at all was impossible, where the only sound was wind and your own breathing. About the silence that could drive a person mad if they weren't ready for it. The last woman, Constance, she lasted until December. Then she woke up one morning, looked at the snow piled against the window, and something in her just broke. She left that day. In a blizzard. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She made it to town, but barely. Lost 2 toes to frostbite. Maylene listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're trying to scare me," she said finally. "I'm trying to be honest. You said you wanted truth." "I did, and now I have it." She looked at him directly. "Do you want me to leave?" "What? No." "Then why are you giving me reasons to go?" I'm not Elias stopped, frustrated. I'm trying to prepare you, so you know what you're getting into, so you can make a real choice instead of being blindsided when winter hits. I have already made my choice. Maylene's voice was calm, certain. I knew winter would be hard. I did not know the details, but I knew enough. I am not afraid of cold. I am not afraid of silence. I am not afraid of being alone with you for months. She paused. Are you afraid of being alone with me? The question hit him sideways. Was he? Maybe a little. Not because he thought she'd hurt him, but because months of close quarters would strip away every pretense. She'd see all of him, the moods, the silence, the darkness that sometimes crept in when he'd been alone too long. No hiding, no escape. Yeah, he admitted. Kind of. Why? Because you'll see all the worst parts of me, the parts that made the others leave, and you might decide I'm too much after all. Maylene laughed, short and sharp. Elias, I have already seen your worst parts. You think I do not notice when you wake at night and sit by the fire for hours? When you go 3 days barely speaking because something is heavy in your mind? When you push yourself too hard because you do not believe you deserve rest? She shook her head. I see all of this. And I am still here. Winter makes it worse. Then it makes it worse. We will manage. She stood, brushed off her dress. You keep waiting for me to find the reason to leave. Stop waiting. I am not going anywhere. She went inside, leaving Elias sitting in the growing darkness, trying to believe what she'd said. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. They harvested Maylene's garden. The Chinese vegetables had survived, barely, though they were smaller than she'd hoped. They preserved everything they could, using methods Maylene had learned in San Francisco combined with techniques Elias had picked up over the years. They hunted, smoked meat, dried fish from the creek. They gathered firewood until they had enough to build a second cabin, then gathered more. Maylene worked with the kind of focused intensity that Elias had learned meant she was worried. She didn't say it, but he could see it in the way she double-checked their supplies, in how she made lists and crossed things off and then made new lists. One evening in late August, Elias found her counting their food stores for the 3rd time that week. We have enough, he said gently. How do you know? Because I've done this for 15 years. We have enough for 2 people for 6 months, even if we get snowed in the whole time. And if something happens, if we lose supplies, if the roof leaks and ruins the grain, if animals get into the stores, then we make do with what we have left. That is not a plan. That is hope. She turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Elias saw real fear in her eyes. I cannot control the weather. I cannot control if something breaks, but I can control our preparation, so let me prepare. Elias understood then. Maylene had survived by staying 3 steps ahead of disaster, by planning for every possibility, by never being caught unprepared. The idea of leaving anything to chance went against every instinct that had kept her alive. Okay, he said. What else do we need? The fear in her eyes eased slightly. More salt, at least another 20 pounds, and we need better organization for the root cellar. Everything is just piled in. If something spoils, it will ruin what is next to it. We'll go to town next week, get the salt, and I'll help you reorganize the cellar. You do not think I am being foolish? I think you're being smart. The difference between surviving winter and dying in it is usually just preparation. He moved closer, rested a hand on her shoulder. But Maylene, we're going to be okay. Even if everything doesn't go perfect, we'll figure it out. She leaned into his touch slightly, just for a moment. You are very calm about things that could kill us. You're very worried about things that probably won't. Probably is not definitely. Nothing is definite, but we've got a better chance together than either of us did alone. Maylene looked up at him, something shifting in her expression. When did you become the optimistic one? When you showed up and decided we weren't just surviving anymore. She smiled at that, small and real, and some of the tension left her shoulders. They made the trip to Prospect Ridge the following week. The town was busier than usual. Other mountain dwellers stocking up before winter, traders passing through on their last runs before the snow closed the passes. Elias bought the salt and extra ammunition, while Maylene disappeared into the dry goods store. When she emerged, she was carrying a package wrapped in brown paper and had an expression that Elias had learned meant she was pleased with herself. What did you buy? Fabric, good wool, heavy. She tucked it under her arm protectively. We will need warmer clothes for winter. What you have is inadequate. I've survived 15 winters in what I have. Survived is not the same as comfortable. I am making you a proper coat. Maylene, you don't have to, I know I do not have to. I want to. There is a difference. She was already walking toward where they'd left the horses. Also, I bought yarn. I will teach myself to knit. We will need socks. Many socks. Elias followed her, something warm and complicated tangling in his chest. No one had made him clothes since his mother died. He'd gotten used to wearing things until they fell apart, then replacing them with whatever he could buy or barter for. The idea of Maylene sitting by the fire, making him a coat with her own hands, felt almost overwhelming. They were loading the supplies when a voice called out behind them. "Well now, heard you'd found yourself another one, Crow." Elias turned to find Jack Morrison leaning against the post outside the saloon. Morrison was a trapper who worked the higher elevations, spent most of his time drunk when he was in town, and had opinions about everything. "Morrison," Elias said evenly. "That her?" Morrison's eyes slid over Maylene with the kind of assessment that made Elias's jaw tighten. "Chinese, huh? Heard about that. Must be different from the white ones." Maylene's expression went flat and cold. "Different how?" "Oh, you know," Morrison grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "More exotic. Bet you're real accommodating too, aren't you, sweetheart? That's what they say about Chinese girls. Real eager to please." Elias was moving before he'd consciously decided to. 3 steps put him between Morrison and Maylene, close enough that Morrison had to crane his neck back to look at him. "Walk away," Elias said quietly. "Now hold on. Walk away." His voice had dropped into that register that usually made smart people step back. "Or I will make you walk away. Your choice." Morrison tried to hold his ground for about 5 seconds. Then survival instinct kicked in, and he stumbled backward. "Jesus, Crow, can't take a joke?" "That wasn't a joke. That was you being disrespectful to my wife." Elias let the word hang there, heavy and deliberate. "Don't do it again." He turned his back on Morrison, a calculated insult, and found Maylene watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Wife?" she said quietly as they mounted their horses. Elias felt heat creep up his neck. It seemed like the simplest explanation. "We are not married." "I know, but people assume, and it's easier to just—" He stopped, suddenly worried he'd overstepped. "I shouldn't have said that without asking you first." Maylene was quiet as they rode out of town. Elias kept waiting for her to be angry, to call him out for claiming something that wasn't true. Instead, she just seemed thoughtful. Finally, as they reached the turnoff to the mountain trail, she spoke. "We should actually marry then." Elias nearly fell off his horse. "What? You called me your wife. We should make it true." She said it in the same tone she used to discuss chicken coops. "It is practical. If something happens to you, I would have claim to the cabin and supplies. If something happens to me, you would have authority to make decisions. Also, people will talk less if we are actually married." Those are very practical reasons. What other reasons are there? Elias thought about the past 3 months, about watching her transform his cabin into a home, about the way she'd taken his hand in the darkness during the storm, about how she looked at him like he was just a man instead of a monster. "Some people marry because they love each other," he said carefully. Maylene looked at him directly. "Do you love me?" The question should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like a relief. "I don't know," Elias admitted. "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like, but I know I want you here. I know the thought of you leaving makes my chest hurt. I know I'd fight anyone who tried to hurt you. Is that love?" "I do not know either," Maylene said. "In China, my parents' marriage was arranged. They tolerated each other. In San Francisco, I saw people claim to love each other and then destroy each other, so I do not trust that word." She paused. "But I trust you. I trust this. Whatever this is." "Then maybe that's enough." "Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "I will marry you. Not for love. Not yet. But for partnership. For building something together. For having someone who sees me and does not look away. Is that acceptable?" Elias felt something crack open in his chest, relief and hope and terror all tangled together. Yeah, he said roughly. That's acceptable. Good. Then we will marry before winter. I will not spend months in close quarters with a man who is not actually my husband. People are already talking. We might as well give them truth to talk about. They married 3 weeks later in Prospect Ridge, with the justice of the peace and 2 random townsfolk pulled in as witnesses. Maylene wore her best dress, still worn, still mended, but clean. Elias had trimmed his beard again and put on the new shirt she'd made him from some of the wool she'd bought. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. The justice asked the required questions. They gave the required answers. Elias put a simple gold band on Maylene's finger. He'd bought it from the general store, the plainest one they had, worried anything fancier would seem like he was trying to make this something it wasn't. When the justice pronounced them married and told Elias he could kiss his bride, Maylene looked at him with that same flat expression she used for everything. "We do not have to," she said quietly. "I know. But we could, if you want." Elias leaned down and kissed her, gentle, brief, just a press of lips that tasted like promise and possibility. When he pulled back, Maylene's cheeks were flushed, and something had shifted in her eyes. "Acceptable," she said, but her voice was softer than usual. They rode back to the cabin as the sun set, painting the mountains gold and crimson. Neither of them spoke much. There was no need. When they reached home, and it was home now, truly home, Maylene dismounted and stood looking at the cabin for a long moment. "This is ours now," she said. "Not yours, not mine. Ours." "Yeah. Then we will make it worthy of that." She turned to him, and in the fading light, Elias could see determination and something else, something that might eventually become love. "We will make this place strong enough to hold us, both of us, exactly as we are." That night they shared the bed the same as they had for weeks. But this time, when Maylene's hand found his in the darkness, it felt different, like a choice instead of an accident, like the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. Outside, the first cold wind of autumn rattled the windows, and Elias knew winter was coming, knew it would be hard, knew it would test everything they'd built. But as he lay there in the darkness, Maylene's hand warm in his, he thought maybe they might actually be strong enough to survive it, together. The first snow came in early October, a month earlier than usual. Elias woke to find the world outside transformed, everything white and silent and strange. Beside him, Maylene was already awake, staring at the window with an expression he couldn't read. "It's early," he said. "Is this normal?" "No, but not unheard of either." He got up, added wood to the fire that had burned low overnight. Could melt off in a few days, or it could stay. Maylene rose and went to the window, pressing her hand against the glass. "How much is out there?" 4 inches? Maybe 5? She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to face him, and Elias saw the fear she was trying to hide. "We are ready, yes? We have enough?" "We're ready." He went to her, took her cold hand in his. "Maylene, look at me. We're ready. You made sure of it. But if this is early and winter lasts longer, then we ration. We hunt when we can. We make do." He squeezed her hand gently. "You've been preparing for this since you arrived. Trust that work." She took a shaky breath, then nodded. The fear didn't leave her eyes, but she pushed it down, locked it away behind that practical mask she wore. "Then we should check the animals. Make sure they weathered the night." The chickens were fine, huddled together in their new coop. The mule was unconcerned, as mules tended to be. But when they went to check their stores in the lean-to, they found that something had gotten in during the night. One of the sacks of flour had been torn open, its contents scattered across the ground, ruined by snow that had blown in through a gap they hadn't noticed. A second sack was damaged, but salvageable. Maylene stared at the mess, her face going pale. "How much did we lose?" Elias did the math in his head. 20 pounds? Maybe 25? That is 2 weeks of bread. We have other flour, and we can make do with less bread. We should not have to make do. We should have checked the lean-to better. We should have secured it properly. Her voice was rising, thin and tight. "This is my fault. I should have—" "Maylene." Elias put his hands on her shoulders, made her look at him. "This isn't your fault. It's just what happens. Animals get into things. Weather finds the weak spots. We can't plan for everything. I should have tried. You did try. You've done nothing but try for 4 months. He pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her. She was rigid at first, fighting it, then slowly she softened, let herself lean into him. We're going to be fine. This is setback, not disaster. You understand the difference? Against his chest, he felt her nod. They spent the morning securing the lean-to properly, patching the gap, reorganizing what was left. The snow melted by afternoon, leaving everything muddy and cold. But the temperature didn't rise much, and Elias knew this was just a warning. The real winter was coming. Over the next few weeks, they fell into the rhythms that would define the months ahead. Wake before dawn. Tend the fire. Check the animals. Cook breakfast. Then work. Always work. Splitting wood, maintaining tools, mending clothes, preserving the last of the fall hunting. Everything they did was aimed at making it through to spring. Maylene attacked it all with fierce determination, but Elias could see the tension building in her, the way she counted their supplies every few days, the way she'd wake in the night and lie there staring at the ceiling, calculating, worrying, planning. One evening in late October, as they sat mending clothes by the fire, Elias decided to push. Tell me about San Francisco. Maylene's hat instilled on the sock she was darning. Why? Because we've been married a month, and I know almost nothing about your life before you came here. There is not much to tell. I don't believe that. She was quiet for a long moment, her needle poised over the worn fabric. Then she set the sock aside. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me. Maylene stared into the fire, and when she spoke, her voice was distant. I arrived in San Francisco when I was 12. My mother had died the year before. Cholera. My father brought me to America because he believed we would have a better life. He worked on the railroad. I was supposed to go to school, learn English, become American. She said the last word with something bitter in it. But he died 2 years later, accident on the tracks. And I was alone. What did you do? That was later. First, I just survived. Worked 16 hours a day, slept in a room with 8 other girls, saved every penny I could because I knew if I did not save, I would never escape. She picked up the sock again, started darning with sharp, angry stitches. For years I saved. I thought maybe I could open my own business, but no one would rent to a Chinese woman alone. No one would give me credit. Every door was closed. Then the matrimonial bureau. Not right away. First, I tried to find a husband in San Francisco. There were many Chinese men, but they wanted... She paused, searching for words. They wanted someone soft. Someone who would serve and not speak. Someone who would make them feel powerful. I tried to be that. For almost a year I tried, but I could not do it. I would rather be alone than small. Elias understood that bone deep. The white men were worse, Maylene continued. The ones who wanted Chinese women wanted us because they thought we would be exotic and submissive. Dolls, not people. So I stopped trying. Decided I would rather be alone forever than be someone's decoration. What changed? I turned 32, and I realized I had been working for 20 years with nothing to show for it. No family, no home, no future. Just work and sleep and more work. She looked at him then. I did not want to die in that laundry. So I looked at the matrimonial advertisements. Most of them were lies. Men wanting servants or pretty faces. But yours was different. How? You said you wanted someone strong, not decorative. You said you lived far from people. You did not promise comfort or romance. You promised honesty and hard work. She smiled slightly. I thought, this man at least does not lie about what he wants, so I wrote to you. And came all this way. She went back to her darning. My friends in San Francisco thought I was insane, moving to the mountains to marry a stranger. But they were still in that laundry, still saving pennies, still hoping something would change. I decided to make something change. Elias watched her work. This woman who'd crossed an ocean and a continent, who'd survived everything that had tried to break her, who'd looked at his advertisement and seen possibility instead of fear. I'm glad you did, he said quietly. So am I. She tied off her thread, examined her work. Though you should know, if this winter kills us, I will be very angry. That startled a laugh out of him. Noted. The real snow came in November, and this time it didn't melt. It piled up steadily, day after day, until the world outside was nothing but white. The wind howled like something alive, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being poured. They were trapped inside for days at a time. Elias had warned Maylene about this, but warning and experiencing were different things. He could see her struggling with it, the confinement, the endless sameness, the way the walls seemed to press in closer every day. She tried to stay busy, cooking, cleaning, mending, organizing. But there were only so many times you could organize the same shelves before it became clear you were just moving things around to have something to do. One evening, after they'd been snowed in for nearly a week, Maylene snapped, "I cannot do this." Elias looked up from the trap he was mending. "Cannot do what?" "This. Sit here, day after day, nothing changing, nothing happening." She was pacing, her movements jerky and frustrated. "In San Francisco, I hated the work, but at least there was movement. People, sound. Here, there is nothing, just silence and snow and waiting. It's only been a week, and we have months more of this." Her voice was rising. "How do you stand it? How do you not go mad?" Elias set down the trap carefully. He'd been through this before with the other women, the moment when the isolation became too much, when they realized what they'd agreed to. "You find ways to make the days different," he said quietly. "Small things. Different meals, different tasks. You tell stories, play games, anything to mark one day from another. That is not enough. Sometimes it has to be." Maylene whirled to face him. "Do you know what I realized today? I counted the logs in the wall, all of them, twice, just to have something to do. That is not living, that is barely existing." "I know." Elias stood, moved closer to her. "Maylene, I know. This is the hardest part, the first storm. The first time you're trapped inside with nothing but time, but it gets easier." "How?" "You adjust, you find rhythms, you learn to be comfortable with silence." "I do not want to be comfortable with silence. I want to do something." She pressed her hands to her face. "I feel like I am disappearing, like the snow is erasing me one day at a time." Elias understood that feeling. He'd felt it himself during the worst winters, the sense that you were becoming less real, less human, just a thing that fed the fire and ate food and waited for spring. "Then we need to make sure that doesn't happen," he said. "Come here." He led her to the corner where he kept his tools and pulled out a piece of wood he'd been saving. Pine, smooth and pale. "You said you wanted to do something, so we'll make something." He handed her a knife. "I'll teach you to carve." Maylene looked at the wood, then at him. "Carve what?" "Whatever you want, doesn't matter what, just something that didn't exist before." They spent the next 3 hours working in companionable silence. Elias showed her how to read the grain, how to make shallow cuts that wouldn't split the wood, how to work with patience instead of force. Maylene was terrible at it at first, her cuts too deep, her patience too thin. But slowly, she began to understand it. By the time they stopped, her hands were sore and she'd only managed to carve a rough bowl shape. But something in her eyes had settled. "Better?" Elias asked. "A little." She looked at her hands, at the wood shavings scattered around them. "This is how you survive it, making things. Making things, fixing things, keeping busy. It's not perfect, but it works." Maylene nodded slowly. Then she looked at him with something new in her expression. "Teach me other things too, not just carving. Everything you know about surviving here, I need to understand it the way you do." So Elias taught her. He taught her to read the weather by the way the smoke from the chimney moved. Taught her which herbs could help if they got sick and which would kill them. Taught her to set snares and check trap lines when the weather allowed. Taught her to maintain the rifles and pistol, how to load and fire them properly. Maylene absorbed it all with that same fierce concentration she brought to everything. She asked questions, took notes in a small book she'd brought from San Francisco, practiced until she got it right. And slowly, the cabin stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like something else. Not quite home. That would take time. But a place where they were building something together. The darkest point came in January. They'd been snowed in for 3 weeks straight, the longest stretch yet. The walls were frosted white on the inside, despite the fire burning constantly. Their world had shrunk to the size of the cabin, and some days it felt like nothing existed outside those 4 walls. Elias woke one night to find Maylene's side of the bed empty. He sat up, alarmed, and found her standing at the window in her nightdress, staring out at the endless white. Maylene? She didn't turn around. I cannot see the mountains. The snow's too heavy. I know why I cannot see them, but I cannot remember what they look like anymore. Her voice was flat, empty. I cannot remember color. I know what color is. I know what green looks like, what brown looks like, but I cannot picture it anymore. There is only white. Elias got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She was shaking, though whether from cold or something else, he couldn't tell. This happens, he said quietly. In the deep winter, everything starts to feel flat, colorless, like nothing else exists. How do you fight it? You remember. You force yourself to remember what spring looks like, what the creek sounds like when it's running, what the trees look like when they're green. And if you cannot remember, then you trust that it's still there, that the snow will melt eventually, that this isn't forever, even though it feels like it. Maylene turned to look at him, and her eyes were hollow in a way that made his chest ache. What if I forget who I was before I came here? What if there is only this, cold and white and waiting? Elias pulled her close, felt her shaking against him. You won't forget. I won't let you. How can you stop it? Because I'll remind you, every day if I have to. You're Maylene Zhao, who organized a strike, who crossed an ocean alone, who walked into my cabin and took it over like you owned it, who married me not for love but for partnership, who's too stubborn to let anything break you, even winter. He felt her breath hitch. Then she was crying silently, her tears soaking into his shirt. Elias just held her, let her shake apart in his arms, knowing this was something she needed to do. When she finally stopped, she pulled back and wiped her face roughly. I do not cry. You just did. I know, it is annoying. But some of the hollowness had left her eyes. Thank you for reminding me. Any time. She looked out the window again at the endless white. Tell me about spring. What happens first? So Elias told her about how the snow would start to melt in patches, revealing the brown earth underneath. About how the creek would start running again, the sound of water like a miracle after months of silence. About the first green shoots pushing through the soil, determined and fragile. About how the air would warm and the birds would return, and the world would slowly, painfully come back to life. Maylene listened, her hand finding his in the darkness. How long? She asked. 2 months. Maybe 3. I can survive 2 months. Maybe 3. We both can. She squeezed his hand. Yes, we both can. They went back to bed, and this time when Maylene's breathing evened out into sleep, Elias stayed awake longer, watching her. He thought about the other women who'd tried to survive this with him, how they'd all broken at different points, how he'd watched them fragment and hadn't known how to help. But Maylene had let him help, had let herself break in front of him and then pulled herself back together. That took a kind of strength the others hadn't had, a willingness to be weak and then fight back. Elias realized he wasn't just grateful she'd stayed. He was grateful it was her specifically. That of all the women who could have answered his advertisement, it had been this fierce, complicated, impossible woman who decided he was worth the risk. He thought that might be love. He still wasn't sure, but it was something close enough that the difference didn't matter. The worst of winter passed, though it didn't feel like it at the time. There were more storms, more days trapped inside, more moments when the isolation felt crushing, but they survived it together. Maylene taught Elias to cook things he'd never bothered with before. Dumplings that took hours to make, but tasted like proof that civilization still existed. Soups that were more than just boiled meat and water. Bread that was actually worth eating instead of just fuel. Elias taught Maylene to play cards, and she turned out to be ruthlessly good at it. They played for dried beans since they had no money, and Maylene won so consistently that Elias started to suspect she was counting cards somehow. You're cheating, he accused one night after she'd won 5 hands in a row. I am not cheating. I am simply better at this than you. No one's that good. I am. She collected her beans with satisfaction. You are too honest. Your face shows everything you are thinking. It makes you easy to beat. So you're reading my face? Is that cheating? It feels like cheating. Then learn to hide your thoughts better. That is a useful skill anyway. They also talked, long conversations that ranged from practical to personal. Maylin told him more about San Francisco, about the friends she'd left behind, about the Chinese community that had been both support and prison. Elias told her about his years alone, about the seasons that blurred together, about the time he'd been so sick he'd thought he might die and felt more relief than fear. "You wanted to die?" Maylin asked, her voice careful. "Not exactly. More like, I didn't care if I died. It felt the same either way, living or dying. Both just meant more of the same nothing." "And now?" Elias thought about it. "Now dying would mean leaving you alone up here. That seems cruel. That is not a good reason to live." "Maybe not. But it's a start." Maylin had smiled at that, sad and knowing. "Yes, I suppose it is." In late February, they had their first real fight. It started over something stupid. Maylin had reorganized his tools again, and Elias couldn't find his favorite skinning knife. He'd snapped at her about it. She'd snapped back, and suddenly they were yelling at each other about things that had nothing to do with the knife. "You treat me like I am made of glass," Maylin shouted. "Like I will break if you push too hard. Because you're running yourself into the ground. You don't sleep enough. You barely eat. You're trying to do everything perfectly, and it's killing you. That is not your concern. You're my wife. Of course it's my concern. Your wife, not your property, not your child. I do not need you to protect me from myself. I'm not trying to protect you. I'm trying to keep you from destroying yourself." "Why? So I can be here to take care of you? So you have someone to cook and clean and warm your bed?" That hit like a slap. Elias took a step back. "Is that what you think? That I see you as a servant?" "I think you see me as something that will break. Something fragile that needs to be handled carefully." Maylin's eyes were blazing. "I am not fragile. I have never been fragile, and I do not need you to treat me like I am." "Then what do you need?" "I need you to trust me, to trust that I know my own limits, to let me fail if I'm going to fail instead of trying to catch me before I fall." They stood there, breathing hard, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Elias spoke. "I'm afraid of losing you." The honesty of it seemed to punch through Maylin's anger. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "Losing me to what?" "Winter. Isolation. Any of the things that broke the others. I keep waiting for you to break too, and I'm trying to stop it before it happens. I am not them. I know, but I don't know how to stop being afraid anyway." Maylin was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the distance between them, took his hands in hers. "I'm afraid too," she said quietly. "I'm afraid I am not strong enough, that I made a mistake coming here, that I will fail and prove everyone who ever doubted me right." She looked up at him. "But I need you to let me try anyway, even if I fail, even if I break. I need to do it on my own terms." Elias squeezed her hands gently. "Okay. Okay? I'll try to stop hovering, to trust you, but you have to promise to tell me when it's too much, when you actually need help. I promise." She paused. "And you need to promise to tell me when you are afraid instead of just trying to protect me from it." "I promise." They stood there for a moment, hands linked, breathing slowly, returning to normal. "We are terrible at fighting," Maylin said finally. "Why?" "Because we both make good points. It is very frustrating." That startled a laugh out of Elias. "Yeah, it is." After that, something shifted. The fight had cleared the air, let them say things that had been building for months. They stopped being so careful with each other, started being more honest about when things were hard, when they were scared, when they needed space or closeness. In early March, Maylin woke him in the middle of the night. "Elias." "What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Listen." He listened. At first, he didn't hear anything. Then he caught it, a steady drip of water from the eaves. "The snow's melting," Maylin whispered, and her voice was full of something that might have been joy. They got up and went to the window. The moon was out, bright enough to see by, and in its light they could see water running in thin streams down the cabin walls. "Spring," Elias said. Maylin pressed her hand to the glass, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking. "We made it. We actually made it." Elias wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on top of her head. Never doubted it. Liar. Okay, maybe a little doubt. She laughed, and it sounded like relief and triumph and exhaustion all at once. They stood there in the darkness, listening to the water drip and feeling the first hint of warmth in the air, and Elias thought about the past 6 months, about the fear and the fights, and the moments when it had seemed impossible, about how they'd survived anyway. "I love you," he said quietly. The words surprised him. He hadn't planned to say them. Maylene went very still. Then she turned in his arms to look at him. "You are sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. You don't have to say it back. I wanted you to know." She studied his face in the moonlight, her expression serious. "I do not know if what I feel is love. I do not trust that word. But I know that when I think about losing you, my chest hurts. I know that you are the first person who has ever made me feel like I could be exactly who I am. I know that I would fight anything that tried to take you from me." She paused. "If that is love, then yes, I love you too." Elias kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle or brief like their wedding kiss had been. It was deep and fierce and full of everything they'd built together over the past 6 months. When they finally broke apart, Maylene's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. "We should go back to bed," she said. "Yeah, we should." But neither of them moved. They just stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, listening to the sound of winter finally breaking. Spring came slowly, the way it always did in the mountains. The snow didn't disappear overnight. It retreated in patches, leaving the world looking wounded and raw. Brown earth showed through in places, still frozen solid. The creek swelled with meltwater, roaring loud enough to hear from inside the cabin. Everything smelled like wet soil and pine and possibility. Maylene spent the first warm day outside, just standing in the mud with her face turned toward the sun. Elias watched her from the doorway, saw the tension drain out of her shoulders for the first time in months. "I was starting to forget what warmth felt like," she said, without turning around. "Yeah, winter does that. I do not want to do that again." Elias felt his stomach drop. "Do what?" "That winter. Not knowing if we would make it. Being trapped. Forgetting what color looked like." She turned to face him then, and her expression was serious. "Next winter will be different. We will be better prepared. I will be stronger." Relief washed through him. Not leaving, just planning. "We made it through the first one. That's the hardest." "Was it? The hardest?" "For surviving, yeah. For everything else," he shrugged. "We'll see." But the truth was, the hardest part wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. The problem revealed itself slowly over the next few weeks. As the world thawed and they ventured farther from the cabin, Elias started to notice things. Game was scarce, much scarcer than it should have been. The deer trails he'd relied on for 15 years were empty. The rabbit warrens were abandoned. Even the birds seemed fewer. At first, he told himself it was just the aftermath of a hard winter. But as April wore on, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Something had changed in the ecosystem, and it wasn't changing back. He didn't tell Maylene right away. Didn't want to worry her after she'd just started to relax. But she noticed anyway. "The meat is running low," she said one evening, checking their stores. "We should have more by now. You should be hunting." "I am hunting. There's just nothing to hunt." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean nothing?" "I mean the game is gone. I've covered every trail I know, checked every spot that usually produces. There's nothing." "That is not possible. Animals do not just disappear." "They do if something drove them out, or killed them off." Elias had been thinking about this for days. Could be disease, could be predators moved in, could be the early snow disrupted migration patterns. But whatever it is, we've got a problem. Maylene's face went carefully blank, the way it did when she was trying not to panic. "How bad?" "Bad. If this keeps up, we won't have enough meat to get through next winter. Not even close. Then we find another source. We fish more. The creek's good for trout, but not enough to replace game. And fishing only works when the water's not frozen." Elias ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know what the answer is yet, but we need to figure it out." That night they sat by the fire and went through their options. None of them were good. They could try to raise more chickens, but chickens meant buying feed, and feed meant money they didn't have much of. They could try hunting farther out, But that meant days away from the cabin, which was dangerous and inefficient. They could try to grow more food in Maylene's garden, but the growing season was short and the soil was poor. We could leave, Maylene said quietly. Elias looked at her in surprise. What? Move somewhere lower, closer to town, where resources are more reliable. She was staring into the fire, not meeting his eyes. This land is beautiful, but it does not want us here. Maybe we should stop fighting it. You want to leave? I do not want to starve, and I do not want to spend another winter wondering if we will make it. She finally looked at him. Do you want to stay that badly? Elias thought about it. This cabin, this mountain, it had been his refuge for so long. The place he'd come to hide from a world that didn't want him. But that was before Maylene, before he'd had something worth protecting besides his solitude. I don't want to leave, he said slowly. But I want you safe more than I want to stay. If moving is what it takes, we'll move. Maylene's expression softened. You would do that? Leave this place? For you? Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. No, we do not run. Not yet. First we try everything else. Only if nothing works do we consider leaving. You're sure? I am sure that I did not survive winter here just to give up at the first real problem. Her jaw set in that stubborn line he knew well. We find a solution. We always find a solution. The solution came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks later, a man showed up at their cabin. He was younger than Elias, maybe 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from years outdoors. He rode a good horse and carried himself with easy confidence. You Elias Crow? He called from a respectful distance. Elias stepped out, rifle in hand but not raised. I am. Who's asking? Name's Daniel Rourke. I've got property about 15 miles west of here, other side of the ridge. Heard from some folks in Prospect Ridge that you know these mountains better than anyone. I know them well enough. What do you need? Information, mostly. Maybe a guide if the price is right. Rourke dismounted, moving slowly to show he wasn't a threat. I'm looking to start a commercial hunting operation. Rich folks from back east paying to shoot elk and bear. But I need to know where to find them, and I need someone who can navigate this terrain without getting lost. Elias felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. I'm not interested in guiding city folk who want to shoot things for sport. Pays well. $40 a trip, and trips usually last a week. $40? That was more than Elias made in 3 months of trapping. Still not interested. Maylene had come to the door, listening. Now she spoke up. Why not? Both men looked at her in surprise. Because it's wrong, Elias said. Hunting for food is one thing. Hunting for sport, bringing people up here to kill things they won't eat just for trophies, is legal and profitable, Maylene interrupted. And we need money. We're managing. Are we? Because from where I stand, we are one bad season from starving. She looked at Rourke. How many trips per year? Right now, I've got clients lined up for 8 trips between now and fall. Could be more if word spreads. Maylene did the math in her head. Elias could see her calculating. That is $320 minimum. Could be more, Rourke agreed. And if you're interested, I could use someone to help with the clients too. Cooking, maintaining the camp, another $40 per trip. I am interested, Maylene said immediately. Maylene, she cut him off with a look. We will discuss this. Mr. Rourke, can you return tomorrow for an answer? Sure can. Rourke tipped his hat to her. Ma'am, it's been a pleasure. Crow, think it over. This could be good for both of us. After he left, Elias and Maylene stood in the clearing, not looking at each other. I'm not doing it, Elias said. Why not? Because it goes against everything I believe about this land. You don't kill things just to kill them. You don't bring people up here who don't respect. Respect does not feed us. Maylene's voice was sharp. Principles do not keep us warm in winter. Money does both. We'll find another way. What other way? We have looked at every option. This is the only one that actually solves our problem. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. I understand you do not like it, but we need this. I won't do something I think is wrong just for money. Then you are a fool. She said it flatly without anger, just fact. Do you know what I did in San Francisco? Things I did not like. things I thought were beneath me. I did them anyway because survival mattered more than pride. That is how you stay alive when the world does not want to accommodate you. This is different. How? Because you have decided this particular compromise is too much? Where's the line, Elias? What will you sacrifice to keep us alive? He didn't have an answer for that. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Maylene cooked dinner in tight-lipped silence. They ate without talking. When they went to bed, they lay on opposite sides, the space between them feeling wider than it was. Elias stared at the ceiling and thought about principles and survival and where the line was between the two. He'd always told himself he had standards, that he wouldn't compromise who he was, not for anyone or anything, but that had been easy when he was alone, when the only person who'd suffer from his choices was him. Now, there was Maylene. And she was right. They needed money. The game wasn't coming back. Their stores wouldn't last another winter. And here was a solution, ugly as it was, that would actually work. But it felt like selling something he couldn't get back, like the first step down a path he didn't want to walk. "I'm afraid," he said into the darkness. Beside him, Maylene shifted. "Of what?" "That if I start compromising, I won't know where to stop. That I'll become someone I don't recognize." "You think I do not worry about the same thing?" Her voice was soft now, less sharp. "Every compromise I made in San Francisco, I told myself it was necessary, that it was temporary, that I was still myself underneath. But sometimes I wonder if I compromised so much that the real me got buried." Elias turned to look at her. In the darkness, he could just make out her profile. "Do you regret it?" "Surviving? No, but I regret that surviving required me to become harder, colder, less—" She searched for the word. "Less human." "You're not cold. I am when I need to be. You have seen it." She turned to face him. "But with you, I do not have to be. That is why I want to stay here. Why I want to make this work. Because this is the only place I have ever been where I can just be. Without armor, without calculation. Just me." Elias felt something shift in his chest. He thought he was protecting his principles. But maybe what he was really protecting was this. The space they'd built where they could both be themselves, where neither of them had to perform or hide or compromise who they were, and guiding rich hunters would compromise that. Not because the work itself was evil, but because it would mean bringing the world they'd escaped back into their sanctuary. "I don't want to do it," he said quietly. "Not because I'm too proud, because I'm afraid of what it will cost us that we can't measure in dollars." Maylene was quiet for a long moment. "Then we find another way." "But you said—" "I know what I said. I was angry, scared, pushing for the practical solution because that is what I do." She reached out, found his hand in the darkness. "But you are right. Some compromises cost too much. And we did not build this life just to destroy it for money. So what do? We think of something else. Something that does not require us to become people we are not." She squeezed his hand. "We are smart. We are resourceful. We will figure it out." But figuring it out proved harder than either of them expected. They spent the next week going over every possibility again. Raising more chickens, too expensive. Growing more food, too limited. Hunting farther out, too dangerous. Selling furs, not enough market demand. Every option had a fatal flaw. On the 7th day, they made the trip to Prospect Ridge to buy supplies and think. While Elias was at the general store, Maylene wandered down to the boarding house where the stagecoach stopped. That's where she met Eleanor Price. Eleanor was standing outside with 3 other women, all of them looking exhausted and overwhelmed. They were clearly from back east, soft hands, fine clothes now dusty from travel, expressions that said they'd made a terrible mistake. Maylene recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once. "You are lost," she said, approaching them. Eleanor jumped slightly, then tried to compose herself. "No, we're fine, just waiting for our husbands." "Mail-order brides?" Eleanor's face flushed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who came here the same way." Maylene gestured to a bench. "Sit. You look ready to collapse." Over the next hour, the women told their stories. They'd all answered advertisements, all been promised better lives, all arrived to find something very different from what they'd expected. Eleanor's husband was a miner who'd failed to mention he lived in a tent. Another woman's husband was already drunk at noon. The third had discovered her intended already had a wife. "We do not know what to do," Eleanor said, close to tears. "We have no money to go back, no way to support ourselves here. We are trapped." Maylene listened, and an idea began to form. When she found Elias later, she was practically vibrating with excitement. "I have a solution." "To what?" "Everything. The money, the food, all of it." She grabbed his arm. "We start a business." "What kind of business?" "Teaching. We teach women how to survive out here." The words tumbled out fast. "I met 4 women today who have no idea how to live in this territory. They cannot cook over an open fire. They do not know how to preserve food or mend clothes or any of the things they need to know. They are going to fail, Elias, just like the women who came to you failed." "So you want to teach them?" "We teach them. You teach wilderness skills, hunting, trapping, reading weather, surviving winter. I teach domestic skills, cooking, preserving, sewing, managing a household with limited resources. We charge for it, not much because these women do not have much, but enough." Elias thought about it. Who would pay for that? Women who want to stay. Women who answered advertisements but have no idea what they agreed to. Women who are about to give up because they do not know how to survive. Maylene's eyes were bright. And later, maybe women who are considering coming west but want to know what they are getting into first. We could prevent the mistakes before they happen. That's actually brilliant. I know. She was grinning now, unguarded and genuine. We could hold courses? A week or 2 weeks. They stay in town but come up here during the day to learn. We charge $20 per woman. If we get 6 women, that is $120. 4 times per summer, that is almost $500. Elias did the math. $500 would solve their money problems, and then some. But will women actually come? The 4 I met today said yes immediately, and they said they know others who would need it too. Maylene grabbed his other arm. This could work, really work, and it does not require us to compromise. It helps people. It uses skills we already have, and it gives us the money we need. Looking at her face, lit up with excitement and hope, Elias felt something settle in his chest. This was right in a way that guiding hunters never could be. This was building something instead of destroying it. "Let's do it," he said. They spent the next month preparing. Maylene worked out a curriculum, making lists of what women needed to know and in what order. Elias scouted locations near the cabin where he could teach safely. They built a rough shelter where students could work on projects. They made arrangements with the boarding house in Prospect Ridge for the women to stay there. Word spread faster than they expected. By the time they were ready to start, they had 12 women signed up for the first session. The first day was chaos. Half the women were terrified of Elias just from looking at him. The other half were terrified of Maylene's bluntness. Nobody wanted to admit they didn't know anything, but nobody actually knew anything. And within 2 hours, 3 women were crying because they'd failed to start a fire. "This is a disaster," Elias muttered to Maylene during a break. "It is the first day. First days are always disasters." But she looked worried too. That night, they regrouped, figured out what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Elias learned to make himself less intimidating, sitting instead of standing, speaking more, smiling occasionally. Maylene learned to soften her approach, to praise small successes instead of only pointing out failures. By the end of the week, something had shifted. The women were starting to get it. Fire starting improved. Cooking got better. The terror faded into respect. On the last day, Eleanor approached them. "I want to thank you. A week ago, I was ready to get back on the stagecoach. Now I actually think I might be able to do this." "You can," Maylene said. "You are stronger than you believe." "So are you." Eleanor smiled. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were the scariest woman I'd ever met. But now I think you might be the bravest." After the women left, Maylene stood in the clearing, looking around at the evidence of the week: trampled earth, practice fire circles, the rough shelter they'd built. "We did it," she said softly. "Yeah, we did. And they learned. They actually learned." She turned to Elias. "We helped them. That feels good." It did feel good. Better than Elias had felt about anything in a long time. They ran 3 more sessions that summer. Each one got easier as they refined their approach. Each one brought in money that they carefully saved. Each one sent women back to their new lives a little more prepared, a little more confident. By fall, they'd earned $600, more than enough to get them through the winter and then some. But the money wasn't the important part. The important part was the morning Elias woke to find Maylene already up, sitting at the table writing in her notebook. When she saw him watching, she smiled. I am making plans for next year. I think we should expand, offer different levels, basic survival and advanced skills. Maybe bring in other instructors for things we cannot teach. You love this. I do. She looked surprised by her own admission. In San Francisco, I work to survive. Here, I work to build. That is different. Better. Elias came to sit beside her. You're good at it too. Teaching. The women trust you. They trust us, both of us. She set down her pen. Do you remember when I first came here? You said this cabin looked like a place where someone waited to die. I remember. It is not that anymore. It is a place where people learn to live. We did that together. That winter was different from the first one. Not easier. Winter was never easy, but different. They knew what to expect now. Knew how to fight the isolation, how to mark the days, how to keep each other from drowning in the silence. They also had something to look forward to. Come spring, they'd teach again. They'd help more women. They'd build on what they'd started. And they had each other in a way they hadn't the first winter. No more uncertainty. No more wondering if the other would stay. Just the solid certainty of partnership. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire, Maylene spoke without looking up from the sock she was knitting. I am pregnant. Elias froze. What? Pregnant. With child. You know what that means, yes? Yeah, I know what it means. His mind was racing. When? Late summer, I think. August. Maybe September. She finally looked at him. Are you angry? Angry? Why would I be angry? Because we did not plan this. Because a baby makes everything harder. Because Elias cut her off by pulling her into his arms. I'm not angry. I'm terrified, but not angry. Terrified of what? Everything. Being a father, keeping you both safe. Not being good enough. The words tumbled out. What if I'm too rough with the baby? What if I scare them the way I scare everyone else? What if... Stop. Maylene pulled back to look at him. You will be a good father. I know this. How can you know? Because you are patient and kind, and you teach with care. Because you have never hurt me, not once. Because I see how gentle you are with the chickens. She smiled slightly. If you can be gentle with chickens, you can be gentle with a baby. That's not the same thing. It is close enough. She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where nothing was visible yet. We will figure it out. The same way we figure out everything else. Together. The baby came in early September, during the warm spell before fall set in. The labor was long and brutal, and Elias felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. There was nothing he could do except hold Maylene's hand and try not to panic while she screamed. When it was finally over, when the baby's first cry cut through the cabin, Elias looked down at the tiny, wrinkled creature in Maylene's arms and felt his entire world shift. A girl, Maylene said, exhausted but smiling. We have a daughter. She's so small. All babies are small. She will grow. Maylene held the baby out to him. Hold her. I don't know how. Learn. Elias took the baby with shaking hands, terrified he'd drop her, or break her, or do something wrong. But the moment she settled into his arms, something in him relaxed. She was small, yes, fragile, but also solid, real, his. What should we name her? He asked. Maylene thought for a moment. May? It means beautiful in Chinese, and rose for the wild roses that grow by the creek. Mayrose Crow. Mayrose. Elias looked down at his daughter, this tiny person who hadn't existed a few hours ago and now was the most important thing in the world. Yeah, that works. Raising a baby in the mountains was exactly as hard as Elias had feared and somehow also easier than he'd expected. Mayrose was a good baby. She slept reasonably well, ate enthusiastically, and seemed unbothered by the isolation that had broken grown women. Maylene took to motherhood the same way she took to everything else. fiercely and with complete commitment. She strapped May Rose to her chest in a sling and kept working, kept teaching when the weather allowed, kept running the household with a baby attached. Elias learned to be gentle in ways he'd never known he could be. Learned to hold something small without crushing it. Learned to sing songs he barely remembered from his own childhood. Learned that his scarred hands could be soft when they needed to be. But the biggest change was in how other people saw him. When they went to town with the baby, something shifted. People who'd always crossed the street to avoid Elias would stop to look at May Rose. Women who'd never spoken to Maylene would ask to hold the baby. And in those moments, they'd see Elias being gentle, see him smiling, see him as something other than the monster they'd built in their minds. "They are surprised you can be human," Maylene observed one day after a particularly long conversation with a woman from town. "Yeah. Does it bother you?" "It used to. Now." Elias looked down at May Rose, who was sleeping in his arms. "Now I don't care what they think. They can be surprised all they want. I know who I am." "Who are you?" "A husband, a father, a teacher, someone who built a life with you." He met Maylene's eyes. Someone who's exactly where he's supposed to be. 3 years passed. They ran the teaching business every summer, growing it slowly. They added a second cabin for students to use for overnight stays. They brought in other instructors, a woman who taught herbal medicine, a trapper who taught advanced wilderness skills. The business became known throughout the territory as the place to learn what you needed to survive. They had a second child, a boy they named James, then a third, another girl named Lily. The cabin that had once held one lonely man now held 5 people, loud and messy and full of life. Elias built additions, a second bedroom, a larger kitchen, a real pantry. Maylene expanded the garden every year, adding new crops, experimenting with what would grow at altitude. Together, they built something that wasn't just survival, it was a life. One evening, when May Rose was 5 and the younger 2 were finally asleep, Elias and Maylene sat outside watching the sunset. They didn't get much quiet time anymore, and they'd learned to treasure it. "Do you remember the first night I was here?" Maylene asked. "When you banged that pot to wake me up?" "Before that. When we first arrived and I said this cabin looked like a place where someone waited to die." "I remember. I was wrong." She leaned against him. "This is a place where people are born, where they learn, where they become who they are supposed to be. That is the opposite of waiting to die." Elias thought about the man he'd been 7 years ago, alone, convinced he was too much for the world, sure that no one would ever stay. That man felt like a stranger now. "I was waiting to die," he said quietly. "I just didn't realize it. I thought I was surviving, but I was just existing, filling days until they ran out. And now? Now I'm living, really living, because you decided I was worth the risk." "We both were," Maylene corrected. "You were worth the risk. I was worth the risk. This place was worth the risk." She gestured to the cabin, the garden, the life they'd built. All of it required us to believe we deserved more than just survival. She was right. That's what they'd both been doing all along, settling for survival because they'd been taught that people like them didn't get to ask for more. A Chinese woman and a scarred giant, both convinced the world had no place for them. Both wrong. "People talk about us, you know," Maylene said. "In town." "Yeah? They call us the mountain couple, the ones who are too much for the world but perfect for each other." Elias smiled. "That's pretty accurate." "It is, but it is also incomplete." She turned to look at him. "We were not too much. The world was too small. We did not change to fit into it. We found a place big enough to hold us exactly as we are." That was the truth of it, Elias realized. They hadn't made themselves smaller or easier or more palatable. They'd found a space, this mountain, this cabin, this life, that had room for all of them, the fear and the strength, the scars and the softness, the silence and the noise, all of it. And they'd opened that space to others. All those women they'd taught, all those people they'd helped. They'd been offering them the same thing, permission to be too much, space to be exactly who they were. Inside the cabin, Lily started crying. Maylene sighed and started to get up, but Elias stopped her. "I'll get her. You rest. You spoil them. They're my kids. I'm allowed to spoil them. He went inside and picked up Lily, who immediately stopped crying and grabbed his beard. He walked her around the cabin, pointing out the things Maylene had made. The curtains, the carved wooden bowls, the drawings May Rose had done that they'd hung on the walls. This was his life now. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd thought possible, but the one he'd built anyway, piece by piece, with a woman who'd refused to let him settle for less than he deserved. Through the window, he could see Maylene still sitting outside looking at the mountains. In a few minutes, he'd go back out there. They'd sit together in the quiet, stealing a few more moments before the kids woke up and needed them again. But for now, Elias just stood there holding his daughter, looking around at the home they'd made, and felt something he'd spent most of his life not believing in: gratitude. Not for survival, not for just making it through, but for living, for building, for finding someone who saw all of him, the monster and the man, and chose him anyway. For being exactly enough, exactly as he was. The sun set behind the mountains, painting everything gold, and Elias thought about the letter that had started all this. Maylene's words, written in that cramped, efficient hand. I do not promise to love you. I promise to work. I promise not to run. She'd kept those promises. Both of them had. And somewhere along the way, in the work and the staying, they'd found something neither of them had promised. They'd found home.